Hi everybody, welcome to the February Supper Club. As you can tell, I don't have my partner with me. Cindy is recovering still from surgery. I think a lot of you know that she had surgery at the beginning of January. It right now is what, January 28th? And so she's still recovering from that, and so you're stuck with me today. So I thought this month we would vary from our 5 Habits of the Heart one more month so that Cindy could come back and join me. And I would talk to you about violence. This is a theme that we've been exploring here at the church, or really just beginning, I suppose. I've been thinking about it for a while, but I just started last week with a sermon. This Sunday we'll have a forum where I think we'll have a much better sense of where people are in the congregation and what they might want to do to try to reduce violence. But we'll also have some chances to learn more. We're going to have a class on nonviolent communication. Sounds really interesting. That's starting February 10th that you might want to check out, and then we'll have some spots in 49ers as well. So this will be a kind of a mini theme for us over the next month or two to explore. So I thought for today, I thought I would recap the sermon that I just gave. I think there's some good food for thought that would really stir some conversation in your supper clubs, and do so in a way that's not too confrontational. I know how sensitive this subject is. We all have very different opinions about how to reduce violence. But the sermon was really about trying to find some theological underpinnings for thinking about violence, and so I think it might take us in a different direction that allows you to just speak from your personal experience in a way that hopefully doesn't end up with fights. You know, it really wouldn't be good if we had violence at the supper club that talked about violence. So try to be gentle and kind and patient with each other as you hear each other out, and if you have different opinions, then that's okay. So the sermon began with 2 basic Christian, what I think are foundational claims that we make. The first one is that we are made in the image of God. We take Genesis 1:26 seriously, and that means that we have this as a foundational theological statement for us, that we are made in God's image. And if that's true, then and made by God, it's both in that same piece of Genesis that God creates us and God creates us in God's image, then we are valuable to God. The language I used in the sermon was that we are precious. There's something about that word that particularly brings it alive for me, that we really are precious, not only to God, but just in point. We are valuable. So that's a theological claim that we make as Christians. A second one is that we are all working toward the kingdom of God. That's the language that Jesus used. We might use different language now, but it's really, I think, the claim that we are trying to create a world the way it should be. And for that, I used Micah 4, where Micah, the prophet, talks about in the days to come, someday, there will be this day where basically we'll be at peace, where they'll beat their swords into plowshares, and he imagines this world, and I think it's a world where we all have in our own imagination that we'd like to move toward, and we as Christians are called to move toward it. And so we take these 2 foundational statements, that we are made in the image of God and that we are working toward God's kingdom. If you put these together, what we have then is the idea that the way we'll know we're getting closer to the kingdom is that because we're paying attention to that first part, that our own preciousness. And then violence, then we're close to a theological definition of violence. That violence is anything that violates, right? Same root as violence. It's anything that violates that basic preciousness, that basic value that we have that's inherent because we were made in God's image. And when that happens, we move further from the kingdom of God rather than closer. So that's theologically what I tried to lay out for us. And then I suggested, with that definition, then violence isn't simply just physically harming another person. It's more a forgetting or a denial or a betrayal of that basic theological claim that we are precious, and therefore we move further from God's kingdom. And so we're violent in lots of ways. We're violent to each other, not just when we physically harm each other, but anytime we forget each other's preciousness. And so you could simply ostracize someone. There's ways in which you could be cruel in your words to someone, but even ways in which the person might not know that you're being violent to them, but you are, because you've forgotten their preciousness. We can also be violent to our planet, the world around us. I see so many examples in our world where we think of it as simply in a utilitarian kind of perspective. What can I use this for? A tree, what can I use this tree for? Instead of understanding that God created this tree, and although God didn't create the tree in God's image, that's 126, God did say the tree is good. God creates it with a certain value. And when we deny or ignore that, we do violence to it. And then finally, we do maybe the worst violence to ourselves. We're so critical of ourselves, so self-loathing in many ways. We don't love ourselves, and we don't value that we are made in God's image. Not taking care of our physical bodies is another way we do that. When we eat too much or drink too much, there's a kind of violence to that. Or our psychological self, when we don't give ourselves time to catch up to the many things that happen to us. So there's lots of ways in which we're violent, and I hope you'll explore that. I'll leave you with 3 questions to play with. One, think about your own preciousness. Do you think of yourself this way? I mean, what's your inner reaction to that idea that you're made in God's image? And then extend that to others. When do you really, when you walk around the world, think about other people and that they are made in God's image too? Secondly, around that idea of the kingdom of God, are you working toward that kingdom? Do you have a sense in which you want to make the world a better place? And if so, why? What's your theological understanding of why you're doing that? And then finally, reflect on the violence that you do to others, to yourself, to the planet. Think about the many ways that you are forgetful of the preciousness of creation, and maybe talk together about tendencies you have for certain things that you forget that preciousness. So I think there's lots to play with here. That's just a taste of the kind of questions you might do. And hope that gives you some good food for thought, and I hope you can make some of the classes that we'll be offering in February and probably into March as well. All right? We'll see you next month.